You want me to explain the smiling. I know that's what this is about. Everyone keeps circling it, all of you, every interrogator they've sent into this room for the last 6 rotations, and none of you will say it directly, so I will say it for you. You want to know about the smiling. You have the battle records. You have the sensor logs, the casualty figures, the wreckage analysis. You have everything that can be counted. And none of it tells you the thing you actually need to know, which is why an entire war fleet of the Tarran Concord, 300 warships strong, the proudest armada our people had assembled in 9 generations, surrendered to a single human vessel without firing a meaningful shot. The numbers don't explain it. The numbers say we should have won in under a minute. The numbers are correct, we should have. So you've come to me, the only senior survivor who was on the command deck the whole time, the only one who watched it happen from the first contact to the last, because you think I can give you the piece that isn't in the logs. I can, but you're not going to like it, because the piece that isn't in the logs is the smiling, and once I explain the smiling, you're going to understand that we never had a chance, not from the first moment, not from before the first moment. You're going to understand that the war was lost before our fleet ever launched, and that the single human ship was not a weapon. It was a messenger, and the message was the smile. I have watched you, all of you, across these 6 rotations. You come into this room wearing the same expression I used to wear, the expression of a Tarran who is certain. You are certain there is an explanation that will let you keep believing what you have always believed, that we are the strongest, that the loss was an accident, a betrayal, a fluke, a thing that can be isolated and blamed and removed so that the universe goes back to making sense. I watch myself in your faces and I want to tell you, gently, the way she told me. There is no such explanation. The thing you are looking for, the comfortable thing, the thing that lets you stay who you were, does not exist. What exists is the smile, and what the smile means, and I am going to give it to you whether you are ready or not, because someone in our entire civilization needs to understand what happened to us before we make it happen to ourselves again. Let me start where it started. Let me tell you about the day we detected just one ship. I need you to understand who we were first, or none of the rest will make sense. And I mean truly understand, not the way the histories tell it, but the way it felt from the inside, because the inside is where the war was fought. The Tarran Concord had never lost a war. I don't mean we had a proud record. I mean we had never, in our entire recorded history, 11,000 years of it, lost a war. We had fought many. We were not a gentle people, whatever the diplomats say now. We had expanded across 200 systems by being the thing that won, reliably, totally, every time. We had a doctrine, refined over those 11,000 years, and the doctrine was simple and it had never failed. Overwhelming force, applied without hesitation at the decisive point. We did not believe in fair fights. We believed in fights that were over before the enemy understood they had begun. We were very good at this. We were the best in our region of the galaxy, and we knew it, and that knowing was the bedrock under everything we were. You have to understand how deep that bedrock ran. It was not a belief we held. A belief is a thing you can examine, doubt, defend. Our certainty was not held. It was the thing that did the holding. It was underneath our beliefs, underneath our thoughts, underneath the very grammar of how we conceived of ourselves and the universe. A Tarran child did not learn that the Concord always won the way it learned a fact. It learned it the way it learned that things fall when dropped, as a feature of reality itself, not as a claim that could be true or false. There was no Tarran word in those days for defeated. We had words for the enemy's defeat. We had no word for our own because the concept had no referent, the way a people who have never seen night have no word for darkness. This is not a metaphor. I have checked the old lexicon since. The word did not exist. We have had to build one, these last 6 rotations, and the building of that word is itself the most frightening thing our scholars have ever done. Because to build it, we had to first be able to imagine the thing, and to imagine it was already to have lost something we will never get back. When humanity appeared on our border, we did what we always did. We assessed, we measured, and what we measured reassured us completely. Their ships were slower than ours. Their weapons were, ship for ship, less powerful. Their numbers were smaller. They had perhaps a third of our industrial capacity in the contested region. Their sensor range was shorter. Their shields were weaker. By every metric our doctrine cared about, every single metric we had used to win 11,000 years of wars, humanity was inferior. Not catastrophically so, but measurably, consistently, across the board, they were the weaker species. The assessment was unanimous. The War Council voted to annex the human worlds on our border, and not one voice dissented because the mathematics were not ambiguous. We would win. We always won. There was no version of events in which we did not win. I was on that War Council. I voted with the rest. I want that on the record in this room because I am done pretending I was wiser than my people. I looked at the same numbers and I reached the same conclusion, and I was as certain as any of them. We all were. That certainty is the thing you have to understand, because the certainty was the target. The humans were not aiming at our ships. They were aiming at our certainty, and they knew exactly how to hit it, and the single ship was the arrow. I should tell you about the assessment itself because there was a moment in it. I have thought about this moment more than any other in my life, where we almost saw. One of our junior analysts, a young one named Vorth, raised a concern during the measurement. He had been studying the human transmissions we'd intercepted, their old broadcasts, their histories, the records of who they were, and he said a strange thing. He said that by every metric the humans were weaker, yes, but that he was troubled by the fact that the humans seemed to know they were weaker, and did not seem afraid. He said that in his study of their history, he had found a pattern, and the pattern was that humans were at their most dangerous precisely when they were losing, that they had a relationship with defeat that he could not understand, a way of treating it as fuel rather than ending. He suggested, timidly, because he was junior and we were certain, that we should be cautious of a people who were comfortable being the weaker side. We dismissed him. Of course we dismissed him. I dismissed him. I remember the words I used. I said that comfort with weakness was simply weakness that had given up, and that it would make the conquest faster. The council laughed warmly, and we moved on, and Vorth sat down and said nothing more, and the only person in the entire Tarran Concord who had glimpsed the truth was silenced by the rest of us, smiling, in exactly the way the humans would later use against us. We did to Vorth, in miniature, the thing we could not survive having done to us. We let our certainty crush a true thing, because the true thing was uncomfortable. The humans had simply learned to do this on a civilizational scale, and to do it to us, and to do it with a kindness we mistook for weakness. It came to us during the negotiations. That's the part that still makes my hands shake, if you want to know, the part I haven't been able to put down in 6 rotations of these interviews. The single ship came during the negotiations, and at the time we thought nothing of it, and that was the whole trick. Here is how it went. We issued our ultimatum to the human worlds as doctrine prescribed. Surrender your border systems or be annexed by force. We expected one of 2 responses. We expected capitulation, which was the sensible choice for a weaker power, or we expected defiance, which would have been foolish but would have given us the war we were prepared to win. We did not expect what we got. What we got was an invitation to talk. The humans proposed a negotiation. They proposed it warmly, almost eagerly, and they sent a diplomatic delegation to meet our fleet at the border, and the delegation arrived on a single unarmed vessel, a small thing, a courier really, with a crew of 9. And the humans on that ship were friendly. That's the word in all the early logs, the word every officer used, the word that should have warned us and instead reassured us. Friendly. They smiled. They were patient. They asked many questions about our fleet, our doctrine, our certainty, and they asked the questions with such open, genuine, smiling interest that our officers answered them, because it is flattering to be asked about the thing you are proudest of, and we were very proud. We thought we were managing a capitulation. We thought the friendliness was the friendliness of a weaker power trying to negotiate the best terms of its surrender. We thought the smiling was the nervous smiling of the cornered. I've had 6 rotations to think about those smiles, and I will tell you what I have concluded. The humans were not smiling because they were nervous. They were not smiling because they were friendly, though they were that too in their strange way. The humans were smiling because they had already won, and they knew it, and they were watching us fail to understand that we had already lost. They were smiling the way you smile at someone walking confidently toward a door they think is open, when you can see, and they cannot, that it is painted on a wall. We just couldn't see the wall yet. We were still walking toward it, smiling back. I want to describe the moment the ship arrived, because the smallness of it mattered, and they knew it mattered. When the human vessel came across the border into our staging system, our entire fleet was arrayed there. 300 warships, the largest concentration of force the Concord had assembled in 9 generations. A wall of steel and fire stretching across more space than a planet's orbit. And into that wall, that overwhelming, certainty-made visible wall, came one small, unarmed ship, alone, slow, defenseless. Our sensor crews actually laughed when it appeared. I remember the sound on the command deck, a ripple of contemptuous amusement. It looked to us like the perfect image of the situation, the vast Concord and the tiny, doomed human gesture. We read it as submission made physical, the weak thing approaching the strong thing to beg. I understand now that the humans had calculated that image precisely. They had sent one ship specifically so that we would feel exactly that contempt, exactly that amused certainty, because the contempt was the soil they intended to plant the doubt in. You cannot break a certainty you have not first inflated. They needed us proud and laughing and sure, so that the fall, when it came, would have the full height of our arrogance to fall from. The single ship was not a weakness they were forced into. It was the first move of the trap, and we walked into it laughing, which is precisely what they had counted on. The same events, the human side, from the personal log of Elena Marsh, Chief Negotiator, Human Border Commission. I have to record this somewhere, even if it's only for myself, because someday someone is going to ask how we did it without firing a shot, and the official report won't have the real answer. The official report will be all strategy and game theory and force multiplication. The real answer is simpler and stranger, and I want to write it down while I still feel it in my chest, before it cools into a lesson. We did it by understanding them better than they understood themselves. That was the whole of it. The Tarran were stronger than us. Let me be honest in my own private log the way I could never be in the briefing room. They were stronger. Their ships were better. Their fleet was bigger. If we had fought them the way they wanted to be fought, the way their entire civilization was built to fight, they would have annihilated us, and it would have taken them about a minute, exactly as their doctrine promised. We ran the simulations. We ran thousands of them. In a straight fight, we lost every time badly, every single time. I want to record what those simulations were like to sit through, because the people who will read this someday and call us brilliant did not have to sit through them. We watched our worlds burn in 300 different ways. We watched the border colonies, real places with real names with people I had met, reduced to numbers and then to nothing, over and over in every simulation, no matter what fleet doctrine we tried, no matter how cleverly our admirals maneuvered. There is a particular kind of despair in losing the same war 10,000 times in a simulation room. It hollows you out. Half our strategy team stopped sleeping. And somewhere in that despair in the 3rd week, when we had exhausted every way of fighting them and lost every time, someone on my team, a quiet analyst named David Okoro, said the thing that won the war. He said, "We keep trying to beat their fleet. What if their fleet isn't the thing we have to beat?" And the room went very quiet, the way a room goes quiet when someone has accidentally said something true. So we decided not to fight them in a straight fight. We decided to fight them somewhere they had never been attacked before, somewhere they didn't even know was a battlefield. We decided to fight them inside their own certainty. Here is the thing we understood about the Tarran that the Tarran did not understand about themselves. A civilization that has never lost a war in 11,000 years has a terrible, invisible weakness, and the weakness is this. They have no idea what losing feels like, and so they have built nothing inside themselves to survive it. They have no doctrine for defeat, no emotional architecture for it, no cultural memory of it. Their entire psychology, top to bottom, rested on a single load-bearing assumption. We always win. And they had never once had to ask what they would be if that assumption failed. They had never stress-tested the foundation, because the foundation had never been touched. I have to explain how we figured this out because it wasn't obvious, and it's the part of our victory I'm proudest of, prouder than the bluff itself. We figured it out by reading their literature, not their military records, their stories, their poems, their dramas, the things they told their children. David's team spent a month doing nothing but absorbing Tarran fiction, and they came back with a single devastating observation. In 11,000 years of Tarran storytelling, there was no tragedy. None. Not one story in their entire cultural record where the protagonist tried hard, did everything right, and lost anyway. Every Tarran story was a story of triumph, of the strong prevailing, of doctrine vindicated. They had no Hamlet, no fall of Troy, no Alamo. They had no story that taught a young mind how to lose with grace, how to find meaning in defeat, how to be destroyed and remain whole. And a civilization that has never told itself a tragedy is a civilization with no immune system against despair. We had 10,000 years of practice losing in our stories before we ever lost in reality. They had none. The first defeat they ever truly imagined would also be the first one they had no idea how to survive. That was the wound, not their ships, their stories. And you cannot armor a wound you do not know you have. A people like that don't need to be beaten. They need to be made to doubt. Because doubt, to a civilization that has never doubted, is not a small thing. It is the first crack in a dam that has held back an ocean for 11,000 years, and they have no idea, none, how much water is behind it. So we didn't send a fleet. A fleet would have triggered their doctrine, and their doctrine was the one thing they were good at. We sent a smile and a question and one ship, and we waited for the crack. Interrogation Room 7. Subject KSH continuing. The negotiations lasted 11 days. I want to walk you through what the humans actually did during those 11 days, because at the time none of us recognized it as an attack, and that was precisely why it worked. They asked us about our victories, all of them. They had clearly studied our history. They knew the names of our great campaigns, our legendary admirals, the battles our children memorize. And they asked about them with such admiration, such evident delight, that our officers spent hours recounting our triumphs to these smiling humans who seemed to find our 11,000 years of conquest the most wonderful thing they had ever heard. We thought we were impressing them. We thought we were demonstrating gently why resistance was hopeless. Look at all these wars we have won. Look how we have never lost. I want to slow down here because the first days felt like nothing. That is the part I most need you to understand. There was no moment of attack. There was no point where any officer on that deck could have stood up and said, "We are under assault, raise the alarm." It felt like the most pleasant diplomatic exchange in the history of the Concord. The humans were charming. They laughed at the right moments. They expressed wonder at our technology, asked thoughtful questions about our culture, complimented our discipline. Officers who had been tense and suspicious on the first day were, by the third day, volunteering stories, eager to be asked, basking in the attention of these warm, strange creatures who found us so fascinating. The mood on the command deck during those first days was, I am ashamed to say, almost festive. We were enjoying ourselves. We were being admired by the people we were about to conquer, and there is no flattery in the universe sweeter than that, and they served it to us by the hour, and we drank it down and asked for more. And every time an officer finished telling the story of some great Tarran victory, the human delegates would ask the same kind of question, always gentle, always smiling, always, in retrospect, the same blade going into the same place. They would ask, and the enemy in that battle, did they also believe they would win? The first time, our officer laughed and said, "Of course not. They knew they were beaten." And the human smiled and nodded and wrote something down. But they asked it again about the next battle and the next. Did that enemy believe they would win? And that one. And that one. And slowly, I did not see it happening, none of us saw it happening, that is the horror of it, slowly the answers changed. Because the truth, when you actually examine 11,000 years of victories, the truth our officers were forced to confront one battle at a time as they answered the smiling humans, was that yes, many of those enemies had believed they would win. Some of them had been certain. Some of them had been stronger than us on paper, and we had beaten them anyway, through doctrine, through will, through the application of force at the decisive point. We were proud of those victories precisely because the enemy had been confident, and we had broken that confidence. Let me give you the specific one, the battle that I think turned the lock, because I was the officer telling it, and so I felt the blade go in personally, and I did not even feel it as a wound at the time. I told them about the siege of Hollow Reach, the greatest victory in our history, the one every Tarran child can recite. At Hollow Reach we faced the Drenic Imperium, who outnumbered us, who had better ships than we did, who were, and this is the part of the story we always told with such pride, absolutely certain they would crush us. The Drenic had never lost either. They had their own 11,000 years. And we destroyed them so completely that they no longer exist. Their worlds are ours now. The lesson of Hollow Reach, the lesson we taught our children, was that Tarran will and Tarran doctrine could overcome any material disadvantage, could break any enemy no matter how confident. I told this story to Alina Marsh with my chest swelled with pride, and she listened and she smiled and she let me finish, and then she asked her gentle question, but this time with a small addition. She asked, "And the Drenic, they were certain they would win, weren't they? Certain the way you are certain now?" And I said yes proudly, not hearing it. And she said, still smiling, still warm, "What do you think they would tell you if they could?" The Drenic, who had never lost, right before they lost everything to a weaker enemy who understood something they didn't. And I had no answer, because the Drenic could not tell me anything. They were extinct. We had made them extinct precisely because their certainty had blinded them to a weaker enemy with a better understanding. And I was standing on a command deck, the stronger party, certain, facing a weaker enemy who was asking me very calmly to consider whether I might be the Drenic now. I felt something cold move through me for the first time in the negotiation. I did not recognize it. I had never felt it before. I know now what it was. It was doubt, the first doubt of my life. And I pushed it down and kept smiling, because I did not yet know that pushing it down was exactly what they needed me to do, because a doubt pushed down does not disappear. It roots. The humans walked us through our own history, battle by battle, smiling all the way, and what they showed us, without ever once saying it, they made us say it ourselves, was that the strong, confident, certain side does not always win. We knew this. We of all people knew this, because we had spent 11,000 years being the ones who beat the strong and confident. We had simply never turned the knowledge around to point at ourselves. By the 11th day, every officer on that command deck had personally recounted a battle in which a confident, superior force had been defeated by a weaker enemy who understood something the stronger force did not. We had said it with our own mouths, dozens of times, smiling back at the smiling humans, and we had not noticed that we were describing our own funeral. From the log of Elena Marsh. The hardest part was the discipline, not the strategy. The strategy was almost simple once we understood the shape of them. The hard part was holding our nerve and not tipping our hand for 11 days while we walked them, one careful step at a time, to the edge of the thing they had never let themselves look at. You have to understand what we were actually doing. We were not lying to them. That's important, and it's the part I'm proudest of, in a grim way. We never told them a single false thing during those 11 days. Everything we did was built out of their own truths. We just asked the questions they had spent 11,000 years not asking. We held up a mirror and let them look into it, and we smiled while they looked, because the smile was the most important part. I want to record what those 11 days cost us, because the histories will make it sound effortless, and it was the opposite of effortless. We were 9 people, unarmed, inside an enemy fleet of 300 warships, any one of which could have ended us in an instant, surrounded at every moment by beings who outmassed us and could have killed us with their hands. And we had to sit in that hour after hour, day after day, and be warm, be curious, be unafraid, smile. We had to be the most relaxed people in the room while being the most endangered. 2 of my crew nearly broke. On the 6th night, our youngest, a communications officer named Sarah Chen, 26 years old, came to my quarters and sat down and shook for an hour without making a sound, because she had spent the day smiling at the creatures who she knew, intellectually, were one wrong word away from killing her and everyone she loved. I held her, and I told her the thing I had to keep telling myself. The smile is the armor. The moment one of us stops smiling, they'll smell the fear, and the fear is the only thing that can save them. Our fear is their weapon, so we don't give it to them. We hold it, all of us together, and we smile, and we get everyone home. She held. They all held. I will be proud of those 8 people until the day I die, not because they were brave in the way the stories celebrate, charging into fire, but because they were brave in the harder way, the way nobody makes statues for. They were terrified for 11 days straight, and they smiled through every minute of it because the smile was the mission. We never threatened them. Threats would have given them an enemy to fight. Instead, we were kind. We were curious. We admired them, genuinely. They were admirable in their terrible way, a people who had been the best at one thing for longer than my entire species had existed. And we smiled, and we asked our gentle questions, and we watched 11,000 years of certainty develop its first hairline crack, and then its second, and then we watched the cracks find each other. The smile was the message. The smile said, "We are not afraid of you." And that to a Tarran was incomprehensible, and incomprehensible things are terrifying to a mind that has organized its entire universe around being the thing others fear. They could process an enemy who was defiant. Defiance is just fear with its chest puffed out, and they knew how to crush it. They could process an enemy who was submissive. What they could not process, what had no slot anywhere in their 11,000-year psychology, was an enemy who was genuinely, warmly, unmistakably unafraid. Because the only way to be unafraid of the Tarran was to know something they didn't. And the moment they understood that we knew something they didn't, the certainty began to rot from the inside, exactly the way we'd planned. I noticed the change in their commander, Kesh, around the 7th day. I'd been watching him most closely because he was the most certain of them, the one whose belief ran deepest, and I knew that if I could turn him, the others would follow. For 6 days he had been pure granite, polite but immovable, a being who simply could not conceive of the situation we were building. And then on the 7th day, after he told me about a battle called Hollow Reach, a great victory of theirs, told with enormous pride, I watched something change behind his eyes. I'd asked him to imagine what his extinct enemies might tell him if they could speak, and for the first time he couldn't answer me. He went quiet, and I knew, the way you know when a fish has finally taken the hook deep enough that it can't spit it out, that the doubt had gone into him and would not come back out. After that day he smiled less. He watched more. He had started, without knowing it, to defend himself against us, which meant he had finally, on some level beneath his awareness, understood that there was something to defend against. And that understanding was the crack. Everything after that was just waiting for it to spread. Interrogation Room 7. Subject KSH continuing. By the 9th day, the mood on the command deck had changed, and no one would say why. The festive feeling of the early days was gone. Officers had stopped volunteering stories. There was a new stiffness in how we held ourselves, a new tendency to fall silent when the humans entered, a new and unfamiliar reluctance to be asked the gentle questions. We did not discuss it among ourselves, because to discuss it we would have had to name it, and we had no name for it. We had no word for the thing that was happening to us. We only felt it, a creeping wrongness, a sense of ground that had always been solid beginning, very slightly to give. I remember standing on the command deck on the 9th night, after the humans had retired to their ship, looking out at our 300 warships arrayed in the dark, and feeling something I had never felt in my life when looking at our fleet. I had always looked at the fleet and felt safety, certainty made visible. The fleet was the proof of who we were, and on the 9th night I looked at it and felt for the first time a question. The fleet was the same. 300 warships undiminished, the most powerful force in the region. Nothing about it had changed. But I had changed, and so when I looked at it I no longer saw certainty. I saw 300 ships that had never been tested by an enemy like this one, an enemy who did not fight where the guns could reach. And I understood dimly that all that power was pointed in the wrong direction. It was pointed outward at ships, at things that could be destroyed. And the attack was not coming from out there. The attack was already inside. It was inside me. It had been inside me since Hollow Reach, since the question I could not answer. And the 300 warships could not fire on it, because you cannot shoot a doubt, and a doubt was the only weapon that had ever been used against us that we had no defense against. I did not sleep that night. None of us did, I learned later. 300 warships full of the proudest soldiers in the galaxy, and not one of us slept on the 9th night, and not one of us could have told you why, and that not knowing was itself the most frightening part. We were a people experiencing fear for the first time and lacking even the vocabulary to identify what we felt. We thought there was something wrong with us individually. Each of us lay awake believing he alone had been weakened, was failing, was unworthy. None of us knew the whole fleet was lying awake together. The humans had given us a wound our entire culture had no language to describe, and so each of us suffered it alone in silence, certain he was the only one, ashamed of a feeling he could not name. That is what they did to 300 warships with 9 people and a question. They did not divide our fleet. They divided each of us from himself. From the log of Elena Marsh. On the 10th day, I almost lost it all. I have to record this because the official version will never include it, and it was the closest we came to disaster, and it came not from the Tarran but from one of my own. David Okoro, the man whose insight had started all of this, came to me on the 10th day and said he wanted to stop. He said he had been watching Kesh, the commander, falling apart and he couldn't do it anymore. He said, and I'll never forget this, Elena, we're not defeating them. We're traumatizing them. We're taking a whole civilization's mind apart and we don't know how to put it back together, and I don't know if we have the right. And he was correct, that's the thing. He was completely correct, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. We were not just winning a war. We were inflicting something on the Tarran that no force of arms could have inflicted. We were destroying the thing that held their entire species together, the certainty that had been their foundation for 11,000 years, and we did not know what they would become without it. Maybe something wiser. Maybe something broken beyond repair. We were gambling an entire civilization's sanity, and we were doing it because the alternative was watching our own worlds burn. I told David the truth, which was the only thing I had. I said, "You're right, we don't have the right, nobody has the right, but the choice isn't between hurting them and not hurting them. The choice is between hurting them and watching them kill 100 million of our people. I'd rather wound their certainty than bury our children. And maybe, the wound is the kind that heals into something better. We've survived our certainties being broken, more than once. It nearly killed us every time, and every time we came out wiser. Maybe we're not just defeating them. Maybe we're doing for them the only thing that ever actually made us grow. I don't know. But I know I'm not going to let our worlds burn to keep their illusion intact. So we finish it, together. And then we spend the rest of our lives hoping we did them a mercy and not a murder. He stayed. He hated it, and he stayed. And on the 11th day he stood beside me when we played the last card, and his hands were shaking, and he smiled anyway, because by then we all understood that the smile was the only thing keeping 9 people alive inside 300 warships. When the foundation was ready, when we could see in their body language, in the new stiffness on that command deck, in the way the commander had stopped sleeping, that the doubt had gone deep enough, we played the last card. We told them about the ship. Interrogation Room 7, Subject KSH continuing. On the 11th day, the lead human negotiator, a woman named Elena Marsh, and I will remember that name until I die, asked to address the full command council. And she told us, still smiling, still warm, the thing that ended the war. She told us that the single ship that had carried their delegation to us was not a courier. She told us it was a demonstration model. She told us, gently, as if she were doing us a kindness, that humanity had developed a weapon, and that the ship sitting unarmed in our docking bay, the ship we had let into the heart of our fleet, the ship our officers had walked through and inspected and found harmless, was carrying it. And then she told us what it did. She said it was a field weapon. She said that when triggered, it would propagate outward through any matter connected by the local gravitational lattice. She used terms I did not fully understand, and that was deliberate. The not understanding was part of it, and that it would, in a single cascade, render inert the fusion cores of every ship within the staging system. She said it could not be stopped once triggered, that it was already armed, that it had been armed since the ship crossed our border, and that it was keyed to a signal from her that she could give or withhold. She said that if we accepted their terms, withdrawal from the border worlds, a treaty of non-aggression, she would withhold the signal and they would leave in peace. She said that if we refused, or if we attempted to seize the ship, or if any harm came to her delegation, the signal would be given, automatically if necessary, and 300 warships would become 300 tombs drifting in the dark. I am not going to tell you whether the weapon was real. That's the thing you've all been trying to get out of me for 6 rotations, and here is my answer. I don't know, I still don't know. No one knows. That is the entire point. That is the masterpiece of what they did to us. Because here is what Elena Marsh understood, and what we did not. She understood that after 11 days of dismantling our certainty, after 11 days of making us say with our own mouths that the confident stronger force does not always win, after 11 days of that warm, relentless smiling, she did not need the weapon to be real. She only needed us to be unable to be certain it wasn't. A people who had never lost would have laughed at the claim, would have called the bluff instantly, contemptuously, because their certainty would have been a wall the claim could not pass. I want you to sit with that because it is the whole of the thing. On the first day, the very first day, if she had made that claim, we would have laughed. I would have laughed. I would have ordered the ship seized and the humans detained and the fleet to advance, and I would have done it without a flicker of hesitation, because on the first day my certainty was a wall and the claim could not have climbed it. The weapon did not change between the first day and the 11th. We changed. They spent 11 days lowering the wall, brick by brick, with gentle questions and warm smiles, so that when the claim finally came, on the 11th day, it walked over the rubble where the wall had been and into the soft, undefended center of us, and we could not laugh, because we no longer had the certainty to laugh with. We were no longer those people. We had spent 11 days having our certainty taken apart question by question, and into the gap where our certainty used to be, Elena Marsh placed a single seed of doubt, and the doubt was this. What if they are telling the truth, and we, the people who have never lost, are about to lose everything right now to one ship, because we were too proud to believe it could happen? And we could not rule it out. That was the whole of it. We could not rule it out. 11 days earlier we could have. 11 days earlier our certainty would have crushed the doubt before it formed. But they had spent those 11 days specifically, surgically, removing our ability to be certain of anything, and now, in the one moment it mattered, we reached for our certainty and it was not there. They had taken it. They had taken it so gently and so smilingly that we had handed it over ourselves, piece by piece, thinking we were boasting. There was a vote on the command deck. I want this in the record because it is the most important moment and the histories will get it wrong. We did not surrender out of cowardice. I need that understood. 3 of my officers argued fiercely for calling the bluff. They said it had to be a bluff, that no such weapon could exist, that to surrender 300 warships to one ship would be the eternal shame of our people. And they were probably right. Looking back, they were probably right. But here is what destroyed us. Probably was not enough anymore. 11 days earlier, certainly was the only currency on that deck, and we had unlimited certainly. On the 11th day, all we had left was probably. And you cannot bet the lives of 300 crews and the existence of your civilization on probably when you have just spent 11 days learning, from your own mouth, how many confident peoples have wagered everything on probably and lost it all. We had become, in 11 days, a people who could imagine losing. And a people who can imagine losing cannot risk everything on a bluff, because the imagining of the loss is too vivid, too new, too freshly installed. They had not just taken our certainty. They had given us, in its place, an imagination of defeat, and that imagination is the thing that made us fold the hand that we should have played. I gave the order, me. Not a coward, not a traitor, the most certain officer in the fleet, the one who had laughed loudest on the first day. I gave the order to power down weapons and accept their terms. And I gave it because when I reached inside myself for the certainty that would have let me call the bluff, I found, where it had always been, only the question Elena Marsh had planted on the 7th day, the question about the Drennick, the question I still could not answer. What would they tell you, the ones who were certain right before they lost everything? And I could not, in that moment, be sure that I was not about to become the answer to my own question. From the log of Elena Marsh. The weapon wasn't real. I can write that here in my own private log, where no Tarran will ever read it. There was no weapon. The ship was exactly what it looked like, an unarmed courier with 9 people on it, 8 of them terrified, 1 of them me hiding it. Had nothing. That was the secret under the secret. In a real fight we lost every time. We had no super weapon, no hidden fleet, no trick of physics that could stop 300 Tarran warships. If they had called our bluff, if even one of them had held onto their certainty hard enough to say no, I don't believe you, open fire, we would have died, all 9 of us, and the war would have gone exactly as their doctrine promised, and my species would have lost the border worlds and a great many lives. I want to record exactly what the last moment was like, because I will carry it for the rest of my life and someone should know the truth of it. When I made the claim about the weapon, I was standing on their command deck, unarmed, surrounded by 300 warships worth of soldiers who could have killed me where I stood. I made the most outrageous bluff in the history of my species, and then I had to stand there, smiling, calm, certain, while they decided whether to believe me. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes. I have lived through nothing longer. I watched them argue. I couldn't understand all of it, but I could read the body language. I could see 3 of their officers pushing hard for something, and I knew exactly what they were pushing for. They were pushing to call my bluff, and they were right too. And if their commander listened to them, we were all going to die in the next 60 seconds. And the whole time I smiled. I kept my breathing even. I kept my hands still and open and unafraid, because I understood that the bluff was not in the words. The words were just a claim, and a claim can be doubted. The bluff was in my body. The bluff was in whether I looked like someone who was lying. And 11,000 years of their evolution had taught them to read fear, to smell it, to find the lie in the trembling of the prey. And so the only way to beat them was to feel no fear in a moment when every cell in my body was screaming that I was about to die. I had to be genuinely calm while bluffing for the lives of everyone I loved. And the thing that let me do it, the thing I'm going to think about until I'm old, was that I wasn't actually faking the calm. By that point I had stopped being afraid of dying, because I had already made my peace with it on the third day, and what was left when the fear of dying burned away was something steadier than calm. It was acceptance. And acceptance looks exactly like certainty from the outside. They saw a woman who was completely at peace with the outcome, and they read it correctly as a woman who knew something they didn't, except the thing I knew was not a weapon. The thing I knew was that I was ready to die, and they were not ready to lose, and in the end the readiness to lose is the stronger position, because it cannot be threatened with anything. Everything depended on them being unable to find their certainty in the one moment they reached for it. Everything depended on 11 days of careful, smiling, honest work having hollowed out the thing they would need to call our bluff. We didn't beat their fleet. We made sure that when the decisive moment came, the weapon they reached for wasn't their guns. It was their confidence. And we had spent 11 days quietly emptying that magazine, one round at a time, while they watched and thanked us for our interest. The smiling was real, by the way. I want that in the log too. People think it must have been a cold thing, a manipulation, a mask. It wasn't. We smiled because we genuinely did not hate them and genuinely were not afraid. And we weren't afraid because we understood the shape of the situation and they didn't. And there is a real and human warmth in knowing you are going to get your people home without anyone having to die. The smile wasn't a weapon we aimed at them. The smile was just what it looks like when you've already solved the problem, and you're waiting, kindly, for the other side to catch up. They caught up. That was the moment I'll remember for the rest of my life. The moment I watched it land on the Tarran commander's face, the moment the certainty left him, and I saw him reach for it inside himself and find nothing there, and understand all at once that he could not be sure, and that not being sure was the same as having already lost. He didn't look angry. He looked young, suddenly, like a child who has just learned the world is bigger and stranger than he was told. I almost felt sorry for him. I did feel sorry for him, but I had 8 people behind me and 100 million on the border worlds, and so I kept smiling and I waited, and the great fleet that could have ended us in a minute began, ship by ship, to power down its weapons. I am going to write down the last thing, the thing I haven't told anyone because I have to put it somewhere. When the fleet powered down, when I knew we had won and everyone was going to live, I went back to our little ship and I closed the door of my quarters and I was sick. Violently, helplessly sick, my whole body finally releasing 11 days of terror it had not been allowed to feel. And then I sat on the floor and I cried, not from relief, but from the weight of what I'd done, from knowing I had just reached into the mind of an entire ancient civilization and broken the thing it had been built on, and that I had done it with a smile, and that I would do it again, and that the doing of it had changed me into someone who could do such a thing. We won the war without firing a shot. Nobody died, and I have never felt less clean. That's the part the histories will leave out. That's the part that's only for me. Interrogation Room 7, Subject KESH, Final Session. So you want to know why we surrendered? Now you know. We surrendered because we could no longer be certain we would win, and we had never, in 11,000 years, built any other reason to fight. Our entire civilization was a blade with one edge, and that edge was we always win, and the humans did not break the blade. They simply convinced us, gently, that it might not cut this time, and a blade that might not cut is a thing no Tarran knows how to hold. You're going to want to punish someone for this. I understand the impulse. 6 rotations of interrogations, and what you're really looking for is the person who failed, the traitor, the coward, the flaw in the fleet that let one ship defeat 300. I'll save you the further effort. There was no traitor. There was no coward. The fleet performed exactly as it was built to perform. The flaw was not in the fleet. The flaw was in the foundation, and the foundation was 11,000 years old, and it was us. We were the flaw. The certainty that had made us undefeated was the exact thing that made us defeatable, and it took a species weaker than us in every measurable way to see it, because they had lost wars before. They had a memory of defeat we never had. They knew what we did not, that the most dangerous thing you can ever believe is that you cannot lose. And I will tell you something that should frighten this room more than the loss itself. Do you remember the analyst, Vorth, the one I told you about, the young one who warned us before the war that humans were most dangerous when losing, and that we should fear a people comfortable with weakness? We silenced him. We laughed at him and we moved on. He saw the entire shape of our defeat before a single human ship had crossed our border, and we crushed his warning under our certainty exactly the way our certainty crushed everything. Find him. He survived. He was not on the fleet. Find him and put him in a room and listen to him. Really listen, because he is the only Tarran who understood us before the humans did, and if our people are to survive what was done to us, we will need the ones who can see the wall before we walk into it. We have spent 11,000 years silencing our Vorths. The humans have spent their whole short history listening to theirs. That difference is the whole war. That difference is everything. I have one more thing to say, and then you can do with me what you like. After the surrender, before they escorted us out, Elena Marsh came to me on the command deck. She was still smiling, but it was a different smile now, smaller, almost sad. And she told me something I have not been able to stop thinking about. She told me that humanity had nearly destroyed itself, more than once, in its short history. That they had lost wars, lost worlds, lost more people than I could imagine, and that every defeat had taught them something the victories never could. And then she said the thing I want entered into this record as the last thing I have to say. She said, "We didn't beat you because we were stronger. We beat you because we'd been beaten before and you never had. Losing is the most useful thing that ever happened to us. You've just had your first lesson. I'm sorry it cost you so much. But you'll be a wiser people for it if you survive being humbled, and that's the part we can't do for you. That part's yours." I have thought about those words every day for 6 rotations, and I have come to believe she did not say them to wound me. I believe she said them as the only gift she had to give, the gift of the thing her people had learned the hard way, and were now handing to us at a discount, the cost being only our pride and 300 warships and the entire foundation of our civilization. A cheap price, she seemed to think, for the most valuable thing a people can own. And I have begun, slowly, against everything I was, to think she might be right. Then she smiled one last time, and she left, and our fleet, undefeated for 11,000 years, followed her single unarmed ship home as prisoners of a war in which not one shot had been fired. You asked me why the humans were smiling. They were smiling because they knew something we had spent 11,000 years making ourselves too proud to learn. They were smiling because they had already won, in the only place the war was ever actually fought, which was inside our own heads. And they were smiling because, and this is the part that I think will haunt our people for generations, if we are wise enough to let it, they were not our enemies. They were our teachers. And the lesson was the one thing our long, unbroken history had never been able to give us, and the most important thing any people can ever learn. How to lose, and in losing finally become something that can grow. There is a question I have not been able to put down, and I will leave it with you because I think it is the only question that matters now. The humans defeated us by exploiting the fact that we had never lost and so could not survive imagining it. Very well, but now we have lost. Now we know how it feels. Now, for the first time in 11,000 years, we have the one thing they had and we did not, a memory of defeat. The question is what we do with it. We could let it break us, let the loss of our certainty become the loss of everything, become a broken people who never recover. Or we could do what they did. We could take the defeat and let it teach us the thing victory never could and become, at last, a people who win not because we cannot imagine losing but because we can and have and chose to grow from it anyway. The humans handed us the most dangerous and most valuable possession in the universe, which it turns out to be is entirely up to us. They gave us the wound. Whether it becomes a scar or a grave, that part, as she said, is ours. That's the whole of it. That's the answer to your question. There's nothing else in the logs because there was nothing else to find. Just one ship, just 9 unarmed people, just a smile. And 11,000 years of certainty, walking confidently toward a door that was painted on a wall. And perhaps, if we are wise, learning at last to see the wall, and to wonder what else we have been told was a door.